Hello, our truth warriors, and welcome back to another hard-hitting episode of the Atlantic Underground podcast. This podcast today will talk about things that have been getting people banned from social media or deplatformed from the likes of YouTube. I wish to state right now, for those that wish to report our wrongdoings in such discussion, that the information provided within is directly obtained government data. So before some brainwashed knobheads here cite this information, I do urge you to at least watch the podcast and do your own research to assure you the validity of this data. I will put links into the show notes, but for those that wish to open up the site in conjunction with listening to the show, please go to shellyhipson.ca, where all the data will be accompanying our discussion today. Now, today's guest, as you may already be aware, is Shelly Hipson, who has relentlessly and tirelessly asked the right questions and sometimes the wrong questions to the government through her Freedom of Information requests. The answers that she has received and revealed, the contradictions and the blatant lies of which the government have addressed the public through its propaganda media mouthpiece. What you're about to hear today should shock you. It should also make you angry. And most of all, it should have you asking questions. Now, maybe it's easier for many to ignore this and go about your daily life in what you might consider to be a normal manner. But in my opinion, this would be like standing on the rail tracks and ignoring an unstoppable freight train heading right at you. Because of this, I do urge you to share this podcast. Send it to your friends, send it to your family, and especially those people who have been a thorn in your side through ignorance for the past few years. Just hitting that share button could make enough of a difference in positive changes in the world we live in, and this is all that we ask of you. So we must press on now anyway, as we do have a lot to discuss. And don't let the length of this podcast put you off, because it's going to really be a must watch. So grab a drink and a bag of chips, as it's time to find out what they didn't tell you about COVID, as we know the costs, we know the failures, and we know the deceptions. So let's get on to the incredible Shelly Hipson. Hello, and how are you today?
Great, Chris. Actually, I'm quite excited to have the opportunity to talk to you and share information that I've gathered over the last couple of years. And thank you for that opportunity.
I know a lot of people are probably very aware of Shelly's work. She's been handing out this information to a lot of people over a long period of times. I do see it getting reposted a lot, and I do get it sent to me by a lot of people as well. So I know that this work is very important. But Shelly, please tell us, how on earth did you get involved with this in the first place?
Well, I just wanted to know the truth, like many of us. We saw conflicting information. We were all told basically that, if we went outside without a mask, we were going to, die. Like it was pretty serious. So I really wanted to know what was going on. I had spent some time in China, and this is where it had come from. And it raised some red flags quite early. In the beginning, I was a little hesitant to go and about my daily life, but it didn't take too long where I'm like, I think we got to dig deep into this. So that's sort of where I started.
No, that's it. And it's been great work ever since. Now, the government body you've been focusing on is the Nova Scotia Health Authority, which is actually a non-profit organization. In regards to funding, what did they actually receive in funding, let's say 2022? And where does this money come from to fund them?
Okay, so maybe for your listeners, I'm just going to back up just a tiny bit. In Nova Scotia, we have a Department of Health and Wellness. And under that department, they fund the Nova Scotia Health Authority. So the Nova Scotia Health Authority or the Nova Scotia Health, now that it's called, is a registered charity. and they are responsible for the operations of our hospital facilities. So you have a government department, the Department of Health and Wellness, and in that department you have public health, and public health branch is where Dr. Robert Strang works, and then they fund the hospitals. So just to give you some kind of an idea of the funding that both the department and the Nova Scotia Health Authority have or get, this is from the public accounts. It's government information. You can go to Public Accounts Nova Scotia and supplementary information for 2022. And for example, the total budget of the Department of Health and Wellness is $4,128,000,000 plus. So out of that $4.1 billion, then they pay in a grant to a registered charity, the Nova Scotia Health. They provide them with approximately $2.3 billion to run our hospitals. So that's our money that comes from taxpayers. There's federal money that goes into that and provincial money that goes into that department and to the Nova Scotia Health Authority.
Yeah. Are we aware if any funding comes from any outside sources like pharmaceutical industries?
Yes, actually, in one of my Freedom of Information requests to the Nova Scotia Health Authority, I'm not sure what's given to the Department of Health and Wellness, and I can't remember the years right off, but it went from around 2 million to 4 million just in the last couple of years, just before the pandemic. So I think it went from 2 million to 4 million in 2019. So there is a slice of it. I'm sure there's more, but that's the direct funding from Big Pharma.
Yeah, that's probably just Strang's salary.
Yes. Well, that's in public accounts as well, and that's around $300,000. So yeah, he gets a little chunk of change.
I'm sure he's not worth every penny. Now, the one thing that really bothered me over the past few years has been the use of the PCR test as the gold standard of testing. Even though its inventor, Kerry Mullis, said it was a failure for such coronavirus determinations, how many tests did Nova Scotia have? And what are the numbers looking like on the results?
Wow. Okay. So I'm going to share, excuse me for reaching, but all of this information is in behind me on my table. So just bear with me.
No, it's great. It's great that you've got it.
Yeah. What I want to share too about the PCR test, actually, I don't know if people were aware that in a Portuguese court, the PCR tests were ruled unreliable. So I looked up the study that came out of Lisbon, and they could not keep people in quarantine due to the unreliability of the PCR tests.
Yeah.
And I'm sure maybe you're aware too, that in the United States, they actually stopped using the PCR test in December 2021. So most of us kind of know that, but people that are still getting tested or relying on this to determine illness, it's not very accurate. So in the court system in Lisbon, and in this study that was done out of France, who I actually contacted the person that did the study, they go back to something that we've overlooked here as well. We've handed off our doctors, like our doctors were traditionally responsible for our ultimate health. We weren't handing it over to public health and Dr. Robert Strang. We went to our doctor when we were sick. So they've recognized in Lisbon that, your doctor is the person that you basically go to. The identification of a disordered disease or state of a disease by studying its symptoms and signs and analyzing the tests carried out constitutes a basic procedure in health that must be carried out by a doctor and each specific area by a specialist or physician. So we're not doing that anymore.
No. And that's it.
Just
And
what?
not only that, the cycling of these tests, Kerry Mullis, the inventor, turned around and he said they were never designed to be cycled so many times. And the threshold of the cycles, anything, I think he said anything above 10 cycles is given an unreliable, or you can basically find anything you want within the matter that's left over. And I believe that within the regions, they were cycling anything between 35 to 40 times on that test, which, completely gives, just by chance, a hit or miss chance that you would get a positive or a negative result on that. It was just totally unreliable. But regardless of that, what are we seeing in the numbers? What are we seeing for negative? What are we seeing for what's going on in regards to the region there?
Right. Yes. Well, I'll go through the numbers, but let's keep in mind that the PCR test is not that reliable.
We know that.
So, this is the thing, right? Like we hone in on this information, but the backgrounder is that what is it actually testing? So if the cycle thresholds in Nova Scotia, and they're very high, there was a FOIPOP that's not mine that was done. And for example, when we talk about cycle thresholds and them being positive or negative, the QE2 used 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different types of PCR tests, and the total cycles was 45.
Yeah.
And the positive is less than 35, but 35 we know that it's not giving an accurate an accurate result, or like you say, Kerry Mullis said that it's not even detecting anything. So I'll go through the numbers, but
yeah.
Yeah. So I did this in a way so that, because I see things, right? I need to see things. And I wanted to provide people the opportunity to go through that as well. So just to keep in mind, I don't know if you can see, can you see this, Chris?
It's very clear to me. It looks
very
good.
Clear? Okay, so I'm going to try to take you through some of these numbers. So there are approximately 1,749,000 people in Nova Scotia. And in 2020, there were 238,000 tests that were done. Now, Strang and Houston and all of those guys at the podium never focused on the negatives, but I think that's really important for people to understand that in 2020, 236,820 were negative. Only 1,493 were positive. Out of those, 65 people died. And we know that 53 of them were in long-term care. So
let's just focus on that number there. Out of, what was it, 65?
Out of 65, yes. 65 people that died in 2020.
65 people died. And out of that, 53 people were in a long-term care facility.
Yes.
Which doesn't leave a lot outside the range of that in regards to other people that died from listed on their birth certificates of COVID. And was this all the long-term care facility care homes all around Nova Scotia, or is this just particularly one?
I believe most of those were from Northwood.
Right.
There might have been a difference of a couple, but I'm thinking most of those were died in Northwood. Now, I'm going to put this down for just a second, because there's a really important thing that I want to grab. Just hold on. Let me just see.
So the numbers of actual deaths, considering the panic that we've seen,
yes,
was very, very low.
Very, very low. And I can get into it a little bit later, but I think this might be important. People think that's a lot of deaths, perhaps, but we have to look at deaths overall, total deaths in the province each year. Yeah. So it's between 9,000 and 10,000 people that die in Nova Scotia every year.
Yeah.
So when we think of 65 people out of a population of 1 million, and then we look at that, 9 or 10,000 people die every year, it's not a lot. Most of those people died of cancer or, heart disease, other things that struggled in those 2 years. And our focus was so honed in on this little tiny bit of number of people that were dying, and most of them in long-term care. Now, losing a loved one, I get it. I'm not under whatevering that. My grandmother lived 94. She was in a facility. It's devastating. I'm not cold-hearted.
Yeah.
But most of those people are in that dying process, and that's sad. And they died in long-term care of COVID. So I wanted to this is really interesting. This showed up in one of my FOI pops. So the Nova Scotia Health Authority does not have to post their Freedom of Information requests. So I did a FOI pop asking for all FOI pops, and I received like close to 2,000 pages here, 2,000 pages there, and kind of went through them. So this one here was in one of the FOI pops. The subject is Northwood presser notes. And it's basically to do with Communications Nova Scotia staff. And I'm just going to read through it. How many staff out with COVID? This is Northwood. So Northwood presser notes. Josie, who is I believe she's the manager of Northwood, or CEO or whatever, she's up there. She says about 70, but also 40 recovered, returning to work. Janet, who's another worker there, says, even at the end of life, if COVID positive, we've been told to include in the count. So even though somebody may be terminal with cancer, example, I've seen people that have died of cancer, and what do? They fill up with mucus, phlegm, that's what sometimes takes them, unfortunately. So they have symptoms of COVID, and a COVID case can be probable or from a clinically compatible illness. So even at the end of life, if COVID positive, we've been told to include them in the count. Josie says, today, 22 deaths. Medical director reviewing all deaths. Work with medical officer of health to determine true cause of death. So there is a question mark. I don't know whether they actually died of COVID in long-term care or they died of other comorbidity issues. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention.
So the death count and the fear factor over the past few years has been pushed hard through the media, as well as the general uneducated discussions on the streets by many people. But can you tell us about the average age of the death within the region against the average age of death for those who had on the death certificate COVID-19?
Well, that's a really interesting question. So here we are talking about long-term care and people dying, and we learned that the life expectancy in Nova Scotia is 80 years old, 80.46 years old. Yeah. And then we learned from it's the Nova Scotia COVID-19 dashboard that the median age of those dying with COVID is 83 years old.
So out of all those deaths that we just discussed a few minutes back, the average age of death from all causes in Nova Scotia is 80 years old. But the average age of death for those with COVID-19 is over that at 83 years old.
The median age is actually
which means it gives a likelihood of questionability in regards to that.
Yes. Yeah.
Definitely.
And I want to come back to, like we discussed about the numbers and the deaths in 2020. I think it's really important to show the numbers for 2021.
Yeah.
So I'm going to backtrack a little bit with you. Sorry. Yeah. But So this is the number of tests that were done in 2020. So if you remember, there's around 200,000 in 2020. This is 2021. So we've ramped up testing. So there's 1.3 million tests that were done in 2021, 5 times the number that was done in 2020.
Far greater than the population of the region as well.
Exactly. The population, remember, we talked about it being about 1 million. So they're already at 1.3. It's 5 times the number that was done in 2020. This is the number that were negative. So 1,327,823 were negative. Out of that, 18,000 were positive for something, 953, and 49 died. So this is the numbers together for 2020 and 2021. So 1.5 million tests out of a population of 1 million. So there's 500, more than 500,000 tests done than the population.
Yeah.
And with the exception of around, I think, 20,000, most of them were negative. So when we were going around with masks, most of the people that were around us, if they were testing, they were negative. So 98.6% were negative. 20,446 were positive. So if we take the 20,446 over the total number of tests that were done, only 1.29% were positive.
And so, that's, 1.29% were positive. And
yes,
as well,
out of the total number of tests that were done.
It really doesn't justify the fear factor. It really doesn't justify what was going on, the amount of deaths, the age of the deaths. The 98.6% of people were negative. So people, all these people, and I remember seeing queues and people saying that I'm going to get me tests, or if I don't feel good, it's day 5. I'm gonna. And the fear factor that was pumped into people got people just wanting to test.
Yes,
and that really does come out in those numbers that we're looking at there.
It does, yeah. They were scared, and they were told if they were asymptomatic to go test. I mean, that was Dr. Lisa Barrett's harp line, really.
Yeah.
If you don't have symptoms, still go get tested. So yes, we got tested over 1.5 million times. People did, and 1.29 were positive, and 114 died, right? And in those 2 years, I don't have the number that were in long-term care for 2021, but we know a number were very sick. And I can get into I think one of the questions that we can cover are about the comorbidities.
Yeah.
So it's
insane. It just makes it not justified whatsoever.
No,
the amount of fear and the amount of issues and businesses closed and people losing the jobs, it just was not justified. And the fact that the propaganda and it just blows me away that this is like this now. When we factor in deaths of people in the region, are we just saying it was COVID-19, or was there possibly other causes, as you said, the comorbidities that can factor into these numbers? And what does that look like? Is this going to bring more? Is this going to shed more light on those numbers? Is it going to say to us, okay, we've got X amount of deaths, which is really low, but does that push those numbers even lower when we apply a little bit of common sense to the data?
Well, yes. I mean, I've got the comorbidity information here. Just let me see if I can. Is that what we want to talk about? Just part of it.
The other other causes of death and the comorbidities that were there, and are we looking at even lower numbers when we factor those in, and we just apply that little bit of common sense to the fact that, these deaths that the saying was with COVID in that regards?
Right.
Do we have data that could effectively say this now says that all these people here had underlying issues that could have most likely been the main contributing factor to those deaths?
So I did a Freedom of Information quest, and on June 10th, 2021, asking for the comorbidities that people had that died with or from COVID. And I'll be quite clear in my own point of view. After looking at all this data, I don't feel that people died of COVID. I feel that they have died of the comorbidities. Putting the pieces of the puzzle together, knowing that most of them were in long-term care, and then looking at the comorbidities and how serious they are, and to factor in the test that is not really even a test, it's a technology. So I don't like to use that PCR test. It's a technology that he developed that amplifies looking for things until it finds it. Of course, there could be some debate on that. And that's the thing too. If there is so much debate on it, like who do we trust? And so they've bamboozled us with that as well. So so the comorbidities data tells us that 60%, so at that time that I did my FOIPOP, it ended June 17th, 2021. So 90 people at that time had died of COVID. And 86% of those were over the age of 65. 86% were over 65, 13% were under 65. And then we look at the numbers. For example, 60% of them had cardiac disorders. So 54 out of the 90. 49 of them out of the 90, or 54% of them, had neurological conditions. We're talking people that aren't well at all, really.
No.
17 out of the 90 had pulmonary disorders, or 18% of them. They had diabetes. 19 of them had diabetes out of the 90. That's 21%. We go down and, people often said that they had to get it because they had cancer or they're immune compromised. But there was even a very low percentage of those people, only 6 who had cancer. So it was more people that I feel were had chronic renal disease and cardiac and neurological, pulmonary, in long-term care, that their time, sadly, was limited. And then we look at the presser notes, and it just looks like they were told to be marked into, COVID deaths. And so I'm not even going to say my opinion, because this is the information. So it's here. Yeah.
No, it's insane to see that, these people had already fairly serious underlying illnesses, which, are most likely the cause of what would be a normal natural death. But because they have been tested, and, there's always the argument of whether they died of COVID or with COVID. It'd be like me saying, if I died today, somebody might put me down as dying with a bad haircut. It's, I didn't die of a bad haircut, but maybe I had a bad haircut when I died. And and that's effectively what we're looking at with that as well. I mean, we put those deaths into perspective. What are we looking at? Over the percentages, it's very clear. It really is very clear as to that. Yeah. So let's get on to those that did die, from all causes, as they say. What are we looking at in percentages? for these numbers, because a lot of people have died of natural things every year, regardless of what we've seen over the past few years. In 2020, the numbers there, have you got the data there for that?
It worked out to be less than 1%. So if that's what you're looking at, like of the total deaths in 2020, it was less than 1% died. In 2021, it was less than 1%. Of the total deaths. Like it's nothing. It's 65 out of 9,967, I think, deaths in 2020.
Yeah.
It's 49 deaths out of over 10,000 in 2021. And most of those.
It makes me wonder, if we had a bad flu season, we would most likely have seen a lot more deaths with the flu over, as far back as they could record with numbers. I don't know whether this data is available, but it really wouldn't surprise me if more people have died with the flu over the past several decades every year. And we've gone through that because of that. Now, there's a big word out there now. Asymptomatic. It is a big word. It sounds very serious. Yes. And it was used to describe a large number of people who must have been seriously ill. What does it really mean? And how many of those asymptomatic people died?
Well, it is a big word. I'm just going to peek over my computer here and just to grab a little bit of information. Here we go. So I did a freedom of information.
It's a shocking number. I know it's a shocking number already.
Yeah, I did a freedom of information because it's asymptomatic is you have no symptoms. So you have no symptoms of COVID today. You look pretty healthy and vibrant. I'm not snotting or fever or any of those symptoms. So asymptomatic is that we're basically healthy. But you could go and I could go and get tested and the test could come back positive at a cycle threshold that's really high. At the time I did this freedom of information request, there were 5,884 total confirmed cases, whatever a case is, of COVID. And 1/4 of those, 1,473, so 1,400 of those were asymptomatic, but they were still confirmed a COVID person. So 4,000, little over 4,000, 4,400 were symptomatic. They had symptoms.
Yeah.
And then I asked how many of the asymptomatic, no symptom people died. And zero died. And we know that, right? Yeah. Because,
there's that shocking number. Zero people have died from the asymptomatic symptoms that they had, which tells everyone that asymptomatic means you're healthy. You do not have an illness. But this word was banded through the press. It was such a buzzword for so long that kept coming out that people, were living in fear of that. It's absolutely, there you go. Zero people died who were asymptomatic, which when we, basically say how many healthy people died, well, of course, no healthy people died. But they didn't want to use the word healthy people. They want to use the word asymptomatic.
Yes.
Now,
just one more thing. I just want to
maybe go ahead.
Because this kind of ties. Sorry, this kind of ties in with this part. My apologies.
Yeah.
I was really curious, so I asked the Nova Scotia Health Authority, and maybe we cover this in another section, but I think it's kind of relevant here about the asymptomatic. It kind of ties in. I asked for any record, proof, document, report that an asymptomatic positive COVID-19 case is contagious and spread to others in Nova Scotia. I'm just going to read that again. Any record, proof, document, report that an asymptomatic positive COVID-19 case is contagious and is spread to others in Nova Scotia. We have conducted a thorough research of our records. This is the response. But we were not able to find any records responsive to your request. We are now closing your file. So there was no record of an asymptomatic person that tested positive. Actually, I couldn't give it to you. You couldn't give it to me.
Yeah.
Yes. So I just wanted to cover. Yeah.
So no healthy people died. No healthy people passed any kind of illness on when they tested positive, which again may lead us back to questioning the testing accuracy of the testing that was put in place. Now, what you do takes a lot of time. Now, how much correspondence is required to get the information you have? And how many FOIPOPs or Freedom of Information requests have been done just by yourself?
I would say that I've done 70, 80, 90. I've lost track. And it takes a lot of determination and commitment. I've been joking that I'm almost like OCD, like I've I've got to find the answer, and I'm like digging, because what happens is they don't send you information that's gone through an analytical process. So you have to ask for a record. You can't ask a question like how many or this. You have to ask for the record, and then you get one record back, but it's only a slice of it. So then you have to try to put those records together. So I might ask for hospitalizations, like overall hospitalizations, then how many COVID hospitalizations, how many from other things, to make a picture. So, and the process is unreal. You really have to be determined in order to get information from them. It's like even though they're supposed to be independent, this department, it feels overall, especially the Department of Health and Wellness. I can't say that with the other department. So the Nova Scotia Health Authority, they're much more giving and trying to accommodate, but the actual department of health, it is like pulling teeth. I gotta say, it's unreal. You don't get it easily. No.
Yeah, somebody pays the salaries, so somebody gets to call the shots as well.
Yes, on information that I feel is relevant and public, and it should have been public. For us to make informed decisions of what we were facing, the negatives should have been there. Like, to put things in context, the hospitalizations, the whole big picture. But all we heard was the fear part of it, and that's just unacceptable. We shouldn't have to FOIPOP anything. No. That's our government, that's our department. We pay for those people to do this, to put a barrier between us and information. Oh, you can have this, but you can't have that, because there's all kinds of little parts in the act in getting a FOI that they use in order to not allow you to have that information. So yeah.
I don't know. I'm getting a little bit of interference from when I speak. I don't know whether you've got speakers there. Maybe you could just turn my voice volume down a little bit. I don't know whether you're.
I don't know how to do that. Where would that be? At the bottom here?
Oh, now you're asking a technical retard exactly how to operate the computer here.
Mute my auto.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm talking too loud.
No, it's me.
It's you.
When you're talking, sometimes I'm getting a little bit of feedback, but that's fine. Okay. When we're chatting now, it sounds okay. Now, our good friend Paul Westhaver, let's give him a wave. Hello, Paul.
Paul.
How are you, Paul? Now, Paul came on with us and gave an incredible interview with us way back, I suppose, now on episode 67. He has also been tirelessly working in the same manner as you, as well as many others. Do you collaborate as a team to make the most progress in your search for the real truths?
It's almost like we're connected. Like, we're going through sort of these questions at the same time, and we do work together. He's a beautiful human being. I met him actually when he did his interview on your show, and I can't thank him enough for being there. Like when you meet a kindred spirit of wanting to know the truth, it's just like your foundation is there. You've been lifted. You can keep going on, and he's helped me. I've got the website where I've been able to put things up as well, and he's been so kind. Him and Sam, his wife, Geneve, been so kind with me to help me through and to provide that, because I would share things on, of course, Facebook, or I even sent a lot of these freedom of information requests in the beginning to CBC, CTV, the Chronicle, and nothing. And I would send them to MLAs, the Premier Strang, nothing. And so to have somebody that's going through that same thing, and yes, we've coordinated, and he's my vibe tribe, part of my vibe tribe. So
yeah,
they're
great people.
Yes.
Now let's get into big. I mean, we're seeing big medical problems in Nova Scotia at the moment. We're seeing people that are dying in waiting rooms. We're seeing people who aren't getting healthcare, people who aren't able to even get doctors. It's getting beyond a joke in Nova Scotia right now, and certainly in a modern day setting where healthcare and technology and the ability to look after people should be at its utmost. It seems to be absolutely ridiculous beyond certainly what I'm seeing here in Mexico. The healthcare is absolutely fantastic. Now, many people had surgeries cancelled in the region. What impact did this have during that period of time? And were there any serious consequences because of these cancelled surgeries?
Yeah. So in the beginning of 2020, from March 16th to May 25th, so that was the beginning of this so-called pandemic, they made a call to actually cancel things, as we know, in our hospitals. And this is not my freedom of information request, but it came to me via FOIPOP.
Yeah.
Total surgeries that were canceled during those first few months was 3,213 people had their surgeries canceled. And another 32,540, so 32,000 people had diagnostic imaging canceled. And when I looked through and I scanned through the lists and lists and lists and lists of people and the types of surgeries that were canceled and the ramifications of doing so, I think there are some countries that chose not to do that. But we followed that whole thing. Oh yeah, you got to shut everything down. And I feel that it's created such a backlog, in my opinion. It took me, for example, I've got a little goiter throat thing that was happening, and it took me 2 years to get in to see them for an ultrasound on that. So, people with serious issues, definitely they were not getting seen in a timely manner, even more so than what was historic, because we weren't being seen before in a timely manner. And as a consequence of that, in the attached data set, we can see that 424 patients died while waiting for surgery among over 25,000 patients who were on a waiting list for surgery during the calendar year. So of those 424, it says 33 of them, 7.8% of all deaths on the waiting list involved procedures where delay in treatment might reasonably be implicated casually. Among these were bowels, so people didn't get their bowel reconstructions. They didn't get their pacemaker insertions. They had cancer surgeries that had to be done. There was abdominal aneurysm surgeries, and they died because they didn't get those life-saving surgeries. That's 33 people. So when we look at COVID and how many people died of COVID, 65, let's say, then 49, we can add these people that the orders that the government took, the consequences of those, in my opinion, killed 33 people. Like they died as a consequence of the orders. And not only that, I mean, I think I might be jumping ahead, but 11 died as a direct, they say they have a special phrase, and I'm not going to say direct, but as a consequence or something of the vaccine. So, you know, and it is most troubling. I mean, we've been watching people on TV in an emergency trying to get in and they don't have beds. But, you know, I've got a FOIPOP here. Some of those hospitals with ICUs and beds, they were reduced in 2020, 2019, 2017. Like they have cut back the number of beds. So as people get older or we have an aging population, why would they be cutting back beds? Why wouldn't they be expanding that opportunity to see people in a timely manner? So yes, it breaks my heart that I hear that people are going to emergency because they don't have a family doctor and they're there for 7 hours, and the consequence is sometimes they're sent home and those things aren't diagnosed in a timely manner to save their lives or not being taken seriously. And you know, in my own communities, a man went to Yarmouth Hospital, and come to find out it was his gallbladder, but they didn't take him seriously. They sent him home, and by the time you get enough courage to go again, because you feel like, oh well, there's nothing wrong, there can't be anything wrong, you get the courage to go again, it's too late. And he died on the operating table for a gallbladder surgery. Like this is madness. This is unacceptable. And they get, I don't know how it could be too much worse when you have a department that has like over $4 billion to work with, and they give the Nova Scotia Health Authority $2.3 billion. And I don't know if it could be much worse. It seems like the more you spend in a system, how top heavy it must get. And then, like you say, Mexico, which you would think, assume, terrible us, but you know, that it wouldn't be as good as Canada or Nova Scotia. But we're learning very much differently. I was in Hong Kong. I backpacked through Asia, went to Hong Kong, and I saw a doctor and a specialist same day.
Yeah.
Like there are systems out there that are working.
Oh, yeah. It's the same here. You know, I'm down in Mexico.
Yeah.
And if I want to go and see a doctor, I'll make an appointment. I'll go and see the doctor. It's very cheap. I'm seeing a very, very highly qualified professional doctor. I've got family members that have been for a CAT scan, and we went down to book for a CAT scan. And we walked in. We said, we'd like to book a date to come in and have a CAT scan. They said, we can do it right now. It's not a problem. There's no waiting lists. I think it cost something like the equivalent of $180. And by the time we walked from where the CAT scan was back to the vehicle, the ding on the phone, the emails coming in, it was all the images and the notes and everything. And we sat in the car and immediately sent it straight across to the doctor that had requested them. The service, you know, they consider that it's like a third world country in regards to that, but the medical care, the health care, the dental, the opticians they've got it figured out. The care system here is absolutely incredible, and I'm watching it fail in the UK. Very similar to what we're talking about here for Nova Scotia. But the fact that 33 people have died because their surgeries were cancelled, and based on the numbers that we've looked at here, it proves that cancelling these surgeries was completely unjustified. Mm-hmm. You know, people may argue that this information wasn't available at the time and they were doing their best to protect people. But how can you protect people when 33 people die just out of what I consider to be medical negligence? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. Now, people have been told it is safe and effective to have the vaccine. And usually if there was any adverse reactions or problems noticed, and any medicine or vaccine that had come in the past, it was the protocol that they would actually pull that medication from public use. The reporting systems around the world seem to be showing numbers that go way beyond that safety protocol. What we're seeing within your region alone there for admitted confirmed deaths, did you say there was 11 deaths that they confirmed directly from the vaccine?
Yes. Yep. 11.
And is there anything on severe reactions, or do we not have a reporting system available there to show that, or is there?
Well, I did a freedom of information request on the adverse events following immunization, and the Chronicle Herald, Andrew Rankin actually picked up on this freedom of information when it was done, and at that time, from December 13th, so when it rolled out 2020, until August 2021, so we're looking at about 6 months time frame, there were 213 people that had allergic reactions. There were 66 people that had neurological reactions. Another 145 had a series of other reactions as well. So the total was 483 reactions. Around 80 or so of those were serious. So a serious reaction, I don't know if I have the definition. It's quite important. I put that down, maybe not. A serious reaction basically means that you're hospitalized, you have a disability, you're incapacitated. So your life has been turned upside down. And a non-serious, I feel, is just as serious. So these are the ones that are reported. You may not go to hospital or be hospitalized, but if you go to the doctor with consistent migraines or something else that's not requiring permanent hospitalization, it's still very serious for you. So like in my area here, I know of 2 people that have blood clots in their legs. I don't know if you know, they've added that. So to the adverse events following immunization, they've added blood clotting disorders. There's only, when you look at the graph, there might be only maybe 33 that have been reported, blood clotting disorders. But I'm certainly seeing a lot of aneurysms, strokes, heart attacks in my area. Now they could be, and they may not be. I'm not saying they are, but if the government hasn't come out and told people that a blood clotting disorder is one of the top 10 reported adverse events to the COVID-19 vaccine, they may not be making that association that this injection may have been the cause of their family or their loved one dying of a heart attack or a stroke. So those clots can be in our legs, our arms, our brain. And as they move, if they're not caught in time, they're very, very serious. If you don't get medication, they're very, very serious. Very serious means death. So then do we want to get into, there's an email that a boy pop that I received back about Dr. Robert Strang knowing early on. Is this where we would want to plug this in? I wonder.
I'm going to get to that in a minute. I wanted to talk about something where, over the past few years, I've been fairly outspoken, as many people know. But one of the biggest blasts that I have had over this period of time and used to get from people were the people saying that the hospitals are overflowing. And this is coming from, to my surprise as well, because at first it seemed very credible, because it was a lot of people that worked at the hospitals that are telling me that it's overflowing, or people that had relatives at hospitals. And they're saying that the hospitals are overflowing with COVID patients and that the intensive care units can't handle it. And the amount of people requiring life-saving care is getting beyond the ability to handle it. Does the data we have from the government confirm this?
Well, absolutely not.
No.
Especially in 2021. And I'm not sure if I can show this. It's big, but I just want to maybe hold it up and you'll get a general idea. So these, I had to tape it together, but if we look closely, and I'm just going to put this kind of up.
Yeah.
We have hospitals, and the yellow actually shows 0 ICUs and hospitalizations. So we have the years and the hospitals, and we go right across. So just a scan, not to really read it, but I just want to show the amount of yellow. The pink is less than 5 for all the hospitals in Nova Scotia. And I'll take you through some detail. But when I received this back and actually saw this as a visual of basically the hospitals being empty for 2 years of COVID in most ICUs and in most general admissions, that was sort of the icing on the cake that there's something really wrong happening here. So how many of the hospitals, I'm going to come back to this, how many of the ICUs, hospitals had 0 COVID? And there's 10 ICU hospitals. So maybe your listeners can have, like, what do you think? Did any of them have 0? So Aberdeen had 0 ICUs out of 857. So they had a total of 857 ICUs, and none of them, 0, were COVID. Cumberland, 0 out of 443 ICUs. South Shore Regional Hospital, that's in Bridgewater, 0 out of 512 ICUs. Uh-oh, sticky. St. Martha's, 0 out of 692 ICUs. Yarmouth, 0 out of 575 ICUs. Cape Breton Health had 10 out of 1,494 ICUs. That's 0.67% were COVID. Colchester Regional, 9 out of 1,103 ICUs. That's 0.82%. Dartmouth General, 5 out of 754, 0.66%. QE2, big hospitals, there's QE2, VG, and the Halifax Infirmary, had 74. They were scaring us with this. But when we put it in context that there were 4,608 ICUs during that time, and only 74 of them were COVID, and it works out to be 1.6% of ICUs. Valley Regional had 12 COVID in the ICU out of 589. It equals, that's the most, at 2.03%. As far as general admissions, Annapolis Community Hospital, 0. Buchanan Memorial, 0. Digby General, 0. Eastern Memorial, 0. Eastern Shore, 0. Queens had 0. This is up to July 31st, 2021. No COVID at all, up to, it's a year and a half into the pandemic. None of these hospitals had somebody come in with COVID. Roseway Hospital, 0. Sacred Heart, 0. St. Mary's Memorial, 0. Straight Richard, 0. Twin Oaks, 0. And Victoria, 0. These 3 hospitals had less than 5. And I think that's it.
That's crazy.
That's crazy.
Now,
that's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, if people are absorbing these numbers the way I'm absorbing them right now, this paints a completely different picture to what we were seeing and what people were thinking and believing is going on. With those percentages of people that were requiring the hospitalization, we saw some low numbers there. Do we have any indication of what percentage of people requiring hospitalization were actually vaccinated?
Good question. Yeah, just hold on. Yes. So this is government information. You can Google Nova Scotia COVID-19 dashboard. And so on December the 13th, 2022, 85% of the people had either 2 doses, 3 doses, or 4 doses. So 85% of the hospitalizations were basically vaccinated.
But that's 2, 3, and 4 doses.
Yes.
So what about generally overall? Are we looking closer to 100% of people requiring hospitalization being vaccinated? It's got to be more than 90? Is it around about 94%?
No. Okay, repeat the question again. Sorry.
So the percentage of people requiring hospitalization being vaccinated with you said 2, 3, and 4 shots, but a lot of people only took 1 shot as well.
Right.
You know, are we around about 94% for that, for overall?
That would be earlier data. Yes.
Right.
It was around 94%. So what's happening right now? You have an outbreak. Well, this is what I believe is happening, and I think they're testing the really young children that are not vaccinated.
Yeah.
So it's putting those percentages a little bit down. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, the elephant in the room, how many people or percentage of deaths were from vaccinated people?
83%.
83% of people.
Yes, that were vaccinated died. So again, this is on the dashboard. Vaccination status of death, 2 doses, 25% of those that died had 2 doses, and 58% of those that died had 3 doses. That's 83% of those that died were basically vaccinated. Now, they do a little weird thing with the unvaccinated. They include 0 and 1 dose. So there's no way in this information to differentiate whether somebody was really like, I'm unvaccinated. I don't have 1 dose. Like, so I don't know why they're lumping those 2 groups together, but yes.
No, that's crazy. So let's get back to our favorite professional expert, Strang. Now, Strang knew exactly the reports and the harm that these vaccines were causing. If you're able to get the data, obviously the data was available to him. Yet his weekly statement said, and I'll quote exactly what he said. He said, receiving the COVID-19 vaccine is one of the single most important steps you can take to protect yourself and others from this virus. The science is clear and the benefits far outweigh the risk. That goes against everything we've just gone through on the numbers. Firstly, has the vaccine been proven to be safe and effective in that regards? And, you know, the science that he speaks of that shows that the benefits outweigh the risk, surely he must have, or there must be data available. There must be a risk analysis for this in order to make the bold statements that he made. Was there any risk analysis to back up what he was saying?
Well, I did that quote came from a CBC article that he was saying that the risks and the benefits, and you know, and I did a FOI pop specifically asking for the information that he was referring to in that statement, and I was denied the information, which is very interesting. Why would you deny that information unless really he didn't have it in his hands? Now, there's often reference at the provincial level to the World Health Organization or the Public Health Agency of Canada. But his job under the Act, the Health Protection Act, is to look at the data here and make those determinations. And one would think that if you're asking in a FOIPOP for that data to substantiate what he said to the CBC, that, or CTV, I'm not sure, you know, that he would have that and be happy to hand it over so that other people could look at it. But no, the information was denied.
So effectively, he's not an expert. He just wants to plagiarize and use other people's data. You know, the guy, it's like he's just cutting and pasting stuff. He's just taking other people's information and using it for his area, where his area is clearly, from what we've discussed so far, his area is clearly very different to what we were seeing supposedly in other parts of the world. If we could, you know, believe that people in China are falling flat on the face from this. Now, the region's stance was, and this, you know, I had arguments with people. I had so many things to say about this, but the region's stance was that proof of vaccination was required for non-essential activities. And this actually encroached into the sports and leisure events. Now, with deaths and the collapsing of many, many sports players and famous people now being reported, it's a daily basis. Every time I go on, I'm seeing somebody else that is young or a sports star or somebody famous that's just collapsed and died. You know, in the area that you're in, I was seeing reports of many children suffering from strokes and problems with myocarditis. And, you know, myocarditis irreparably damaging their hearts, as well as many other complications. Now, are the authorities actually monitoring this and prepared to give the numbers out, or is this again being swept under the rug?
The first FOIPOP that I did on the adverse events following immunization, myocarditis wasn't even there after Robert Strang had stated that there were, I think, 22 cases in Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
So that put a red flag. If the myocarditis is not in that FOIPOP, how accurate is that information on the adverse events overall? So then I submitted another FOIPOP in, and what I wanted were the records that were going directly to Health Canada and the Public Health Agency of Canada from Nova Scotia that are filled out, verifying the adverse events. And they wanted $550. So I wrangled the $550 and I paid it. And then I was denied that information. So then they started to put the adverse events publicly on a website. So I would go in and look at that information. Now, what's happening, this most recent, that's their government website, they are saying that they are cleaning the data. I'm not really sure what cleaning the data means. I can assume. So I've done a FOIPOP, it hasn't come back yet, asking for what process they are following to clean the data that lists the adverse events following immunization.
I think clean the data normally tells me that they are, I would use the word manipulate for their own intents and purposes, but that $550 that you paid for an information request to get that information, did you get that back after that? Okay.
Yeah, they reimbursed me.
That's fair enough.
They just didn't want me to have it. They put every stumbling block in place, I think, to deter me from having the truth.
Right. Yeah. They probably didn't expect you to stump up the money for it.
No.
One of the big things that, you know, we've done interviews with Dr. Jim Meehan. We've spoken to many experts around the world over the podcasts that we've been doing. But do we have any information available to substantiate those lockdowns I'm aware of the mental health, the problems and things that we were seeing there, the lockdowns, the use of masks and the social distancing that was put into place, as well as those beautiful arrows on the shop floors and the plexiglass, which clearly stopped a deadly transmission of a virus that was so bad. Did we ever get any information to substantiate that these things actually worked?
One of my very first FOIPOS, because I had difficulty myself wearing a mask, was I submitted one to the Department of Education asking for a risk-benefit analysis of masking. And they did not have any record. So they masked their children without having any proof that that worked. So then I went on to the Department of Health and Wellness. And I actually had to appeal that response because very little came back. Again, they were using the World Health Organization and the Public Health Agency on the federal level rather than our own information and data. There was some information back that masks worked that Dr. Robert Strang sent out, but we can see in the emails that others within his department or Nova Scotia Health were not so sure. They read through the same study and had a number of questions themselves and put those forth to Dr. Strang. So nothing was, 100% for sure. It was all conflicting information, and I've appealed the response that I've got because the data is not complete. So
yeah. When I look back, and I'd be working, I'd have the radio on, I'd actually turn off CBC in the end because every 5 minutes there was somebody who was a supposed expert or someone fear mongering. It was overwhelming, the amount of propaganda and information that was coming through. Everywhere you went, there was posters. Everywhere you went, there was signs. Every person was seeing it everywhere. The media and the propaganda just within the region alone, it must have been enormous. Was there any way that we could ever get any kind of idea on how much taxpayers' money was ever spent on these fear campaigns, or was it just we're never going to get to the bottom of that because it was taken from so many areas of different budgets?
That's a great question. I don't have the answer to that, but I might be able to do a FOIPOP. It would be a kind of an interesting thing. I mean, we just recently we received a card in the mail, and it was from the federal government instructing us to keep up with our vaccinations because the virus is still here. And I contacted some of my friends. Everybody got one, and I'm thinking, how much did that cost for a virus based on my numbers, on the number that were tested positive and the number that died, has a recovery of over 99%. Where's our focus when it's a 99% recovery and you have to instruct people to go get vaccinated? And it even said in the corner about 6-month-old babies are now eligible. And then when you look at the adverse events that I've just said to you about, the neurological, the blood clotting disorders, those types of things, and they've got the guts and the nerve to say that this is where our babies are to be injected with this poison for something that doesn't really harm them in the first place, if it even exists. Like it's sometimes hard on the heart. Yes,
I could imagine the heartbreak, the anger, and the absolute disgust that many families who have knowingly lost someone through, as we've said so far, the fact that their medical examinations or their medical operations were cancelled, or people who are unknowingly have had family members die as a result to taking the vaccine or the adverse events that we have the data on. People who are suffering, people who, even people who lived in fear. And all of a sudden, if that's gone out to everyone, that flyer lands on the doormat of those houses. I really can't imagine how those people feel about that. But their voices are being silenced because this whole exercise that they're going through seems to be far beyond the borders of the regions that everybody lives in. It seems to be being dictated from a far higher and bigger area.
Yeah.
Now, we could say that it's being manipulated by some of the pharmaceutical industries who have just, unparalleled amounts of wealth to be able to do what they want. But one thing that happened, there was that court order for the release of data from Pfizer. Now, this was quite in line with what most of us thought was going on. It was, Pfizer's release of data is actually going in line with what we've been discussing today. Did the authorities actually take any notice of the vaccine manufacturer's warnings in regard to the use of its product?
Well, no, apparently not. Yes, a U.S. federal judge, it was a Mark Pittman, he ordered Pfizer to release these documents. And I did a Freedom of Information request to Dr. Robert Strang and the Premier's office, the Premier. I just wanted to confirm that they had this information. So I asked, do you have these records? Because some of in the back of that records, there's 8 pages of adverse events, like right after each other. And some of them are quite troubling, including like neonatal deaths. And neither of them, no, they found no record of them having that Pfizer safety data information, no record. I would think that if you're the chief medical officer of health or the Premier pushing a vaccine on 6-month-old babies, that it might be quite critical to have the information from Pfizer at your disposal. So last week, I actually sent it to them registered. I'm not going to let them get away with that. You have it now. And what you do with that information, I can see the integrity so far. So, we'll see what happens with that. But no, they did not have that data.
And this is the laughable thing, we are not the chief medical officer for the region. We are not the premiers or the leaders or the health experts for, the areas where this is all going on. It's their due diligence to be on top of everything that's going on, not just regurgitating the mainstream narrative, which seems to land on their lap. It's almost like they're being told exactly what to say and exactly what not to say by external sources. And when we consider that all this information you're able to gather, all the information that's available directly from the manufacturer, like Pfizer's release there, is available. Again, this is gross negligence upon their part, and the blood is on their hands of the people's lives that have been lost over this period of time, which is a short period of time in relation to what I think is ramping up, and I think what we're going to see in the future as this takes hold of many other people. And when we consider the data that we've got, the numbers really do say a lot. I still don't think we're getting the full picture. I still think that we do have worse to come. I still don't think everything is getting reported. So things could be far worse than what we are actually seeing in that regard. It's shocking. It's absolutely shocking. And anyone watching this now, listening to this, I hope you're looking at Shelly's website where we're getting all this information from. We're not just pulling this out of our asses here. This is government data. This is showing you exactly what's going on. I hope you reading through it while you're listening to us talking now, and it is your duty to share this and get it out there. You know, was it evident in that regards that a lot of the information you received and what we're looking at now in regards to what we were seeing in the news, what we were hearing on the radio, that it was changed by the press and the medical officers in regards, they must have had it. It couldn't be ignored. But it seems like it was hidden in that regards. That's what I think. That's what shocks me the most, is that we've been saying this we've gone out, we've looked at what's going on, we've tried to speak out about it. Many people have ignored us. I hope now the data's there that it can't be ignored anymore.
Well, yeah. I mean, even if people had looked at the trials and the monograph and read those, they are different. They are saying something different than what we've heard from our chief medical officers across the country. Like, even in that document originally, I don't know if it's changed, but they said that there was no data on mixing two different types of vaccines. But then NACI comes out somebody comes out and says that, yes, that's okay. Or there was no information on fertility, no data on fertility. And yet then we're hearing that pregnant mothers should be getting the vaccine. So yes, there's definitely was a conflict of what I was seeing in even their very own data, the Pfizer data, the monograph, the trials. There were people that died in those trials. Now when we look back, they excused it away. But what really, I question now what happened. Like, if people died in the trials and we're seeing and experiencing, or we're hearing about blood clots being added and these adverse events.
Yeah, the amount of sudden deaths now has gone through the roof, and every day, and I don't really, I'm not on social media a lot now. I try and not look at it as much, but it's what I am seeing. I'll just have a glance, and it's so many people reporting family members, and even people, just even over the Christmas period, maybe I had a little bit more time to look at things. Just people that I know who are saying, oh, my mother or my father or my sister or one of the relatives or one of the friends was taken. And they are, unbeknown to themselves, they are using the terminology, they died suddenly, they were taken suddenly. It's, to me, it's obvious. I know a lot of people want the data to prove this. They're not going to listen to us. But here's we're given the data today. People are having the opportunity now to maybe reflect on their views over the past few years and what they've dismissed. The information's out there. The information is available. The information's available on your site now. One of the things that came out that I was surprised was actually in Alberta. Now, Alberta had the highest amount of cause unknown deaths. Have we had anything to substantiate in the region similar numbers? And how can a medical establishment and the coroner give an unsatisfactory ruling of cause unknown with their professional backgrounds? If I was a doctor, if I was a coroner, and somebody came in, or somebody is a patient and they die, or I have to do an examination on a body, do I just say, I don't know what they died of? Is that an acceptable thing to say, cause unknown?
So there's two ways to look at that. And I'm just going to share both ways. So one of the FOI pops that I got back, most of the deaths had been put in categories. So then at the bottom, there was cause unknown. And it was a substantial number for 2021. And I asked that of the department, and they said they're cause unknown at this time because they have not taken those numbers and put them in the appropriate categories above yet. So it's like the data hasn't been completed and put into their proper categories. That could be true.
Yeah.
For 2021 data to be completely put in their appropriate categories. I did see that in Alberta. I don't know if they asked those same questions, whether those numbers and that data had been completed yet. So typically what happens is you do not get the completed cause of death into the following year in November. So it does depend. So if I ask for 2020's cause of death, that's not going to be completed until November of 2021. They do something with the death certificates, then Statistics Canada is involved, and then you get the full picture. Now, I've asked for 2021 and it's still not quite done. Here it is, January. So I do have a question mark, what's going on there? That department stated to me some death numbers, and they were a little bit different than the death numbers that I had in a FOIPOP. So then I'm starting to question the accuracy of those numbers. And then CBC, I think, came out with an article stating about excess mortality. And they already said or alluded to that it was probably COVID, but there's no way of them knowing at this point, because I know personally in Nova Scotia, that information for 2022 has definitely not been put into the categories, because we won't see that until November 2023. So they are kind of manipulating those numbers and assumptions that it's, oh, it must have been COVID, when we know here just what we've talked about. There's also, when I looked at the data about excess deaths and I put them in my own spreadsheet, the completed information that we have up to August, the end of August, we are showing excess deaths. It's on the couch over there, but I think I'm just going to guess around 400, between 400 and 500 excess deaths. We don't know at this point what they are, because those in 2022, again, we're not going to get it until 2023. But it does lead us to believe we need to start to ask what is going on. And you know, you've talked about the died suddenly. There's the vaccine. I do question those dying of COVID in the hospital now, or being hospitalized. Are they being hospitalized because of COVID, or are they being hospitalized because they've had a vaccine? And has the vaccine compromised their immune system in some way? Like if we look at the adverse events and it does these big things, why can't it do smaller things that may lead us to question our own vitality now, like our own body's mechanisms to fight off things? So those are questions. I'm not making any concrete decisions yet, but it's sure pointing in a way to something's seriously happening here.
It's almost like they're just kicking the can down the road to not create panic with people. And,
right.
And really, when you think about it, in this day and age where somebody dies or something happens or something needs reporting, the computer systems alone have the ability for somebody to put that information in at that time, and it can instantly be recorded to a database. Mm-hmm. So there is really no excuse in this day and age, with the technology that we have, the ability to record things that we have, that they should not be able to release those numbers and those information. And it does beg the question, are they kicking the can down the road to not release these numbers in a timely manner? So what they're pushing is allowed to continue without causing any public concern, public panic, or certainly a lot of people questioning what's going on.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I mean, I even went back to the department where I got incomplete information for 2021, and I said how critical it is, because you need to get those cause of deaths in there, because what we're seeing around the world, from Israel or some of the countries that are ahead of us, are serious conditions that lead to death. Yeah. And we need that information now to see what's happening in Nova Scotia. No response. So they say that the person that typically did it, this is interesting, is not working there anymore, and that there's going to be a new system. So, yeah, I don't know what's happening, but of course, being the conspiracy theorist that I am, I'm questioning what's really going on behind the scenes with those numbers. Yeah.
No, it's crazy. Now, I'm aware that Australia produced figures that shock the world in regards to the likes of stillbirths. But have you ever looked into the relation in the area of vaccines and stillbirths for women within your region?
I did, but the response, I'm not a pro on that type of thing. So I don't think I worded it properly to get the information. Sometimes so I don't have that information. No.
And that's it. It's like they're playing games with you. If you don't word it right, I mean, it's probably very clear what you're asking. But, this department of freedom of information doesn't seem to play ball the way that you would expect them to play ball. It's almost a way of slowing down the progress sometimes just by, it's like, well, crossing the T's and dotting the I's correctly. It seems to be, that pedantic in that regards. Now, what would you say to people watching this that would allude to the statement that the Nova Scotia Health, in fact, managed it so well that the numbers were low and the pandemic would have been much worse without the use and the measures they put in place?
So it's more the Department of Health and Wellness, because Strang would have been working for the Department of Health and Wellness. And what would I say to them? Based on the information that I have, and the people that died and the comorbidities, and the test that doesn't really test, and the hospitals that weren't really full, I don't think there was really a pandemic in Nova Scotia. So what I would say to them is a little harsh, is that he put all these things in place for nothing. That's my take on it. I feel that the test didn't test, hospitals weren't full, the people that died of other comorbidity issues, not necessarily of this new novel pneumonia. And that's what was said in a brochure that came out from the Nova Scotia Health Authority, that that what came out of Wuhan was pneumonia. That came out in March 2020. Nobody told me it was pneumonia. It might have. So, and then the numbers, when I look at the numbers too, of those that died of the flu in 2019, and then those that died of the flu and COVID in 2020, and part of 2021, I've got some of that information. The flu and COVID numbers are similar. I feel that the people that it picked up on the flu, and so the rapid test also does pick up on other types of coronaviruses. So that so I would tell them, yeah, you can do a great job if you're trying to fix something that doesn't exist. That's not really a problem in our province.
Yeah, and obviously, if they were following the narratives of a huge pandemic being there and what we saw, we've discussed the media, we've discussed everything that's gone on, the queues of people lining up for rapid tests every day of the week, or PCR tests. But let's talk about the amount of staffed beds in your region's hospitals, and actually how many of those beds were allocated for COVID-19 patients during this terrible pandemic.
So I wanted to know the number of beds, of course. So on average, there are capacity beds for all hospitals that are managed by Nova Scotia Health are around 3,272 beds. That does give us a context, right? Because you would hear that 20 were in, or 5 were in, or 50 were in, or 200 were in hospital, but there's over 3,000 beds. Now, yes, the system is stretched. I get that, front end, but it does put it that out of those hospitalizations, very few of them were actual COVID. Was the other part of your question? Sorry, did I cover that?
Yeah, no. The whole
Oh, and
region.
how many were sorry? Yes, how many were allocated to COVID?
Yeah.
I don't know the answer. Like how many were specific? I think the hospitals were open and accepting people in that system of 3,000 beds. There's 117, I believe, 117 ICU beds in the province that are used on a regular basis, and there are over 11,000, I think, ICU hospitalizations during that time, and 110 of them were COVID. So a very small number of the total repetitive use of those ICU beds.
Because I'd heard, and if I'm right on looking at some of the information, I'd heard that, you know, out of all the hospitals right across the region, thousands of beds available, considering what was ramped up and what was expected as a terrible pandemic. I'd actually heard that there was only ever 66 beds allocated for COVID alone, which, when you consider the preparedness of what was supposed to be in place, that doesn't sound a lot at all.
No. I heard too that they actually created additional beds, but I haven't verified this, additional beds to the capacity that we currently have for COVID, and none of those beds were used. So nothing spilled over into those additional 60 or so beds. So that might be the ones that you're speaking of. Yeah. They handled it within the system that they had, but they also cut back on the number of beds in a number of the hospitals too. And I feel that almost puts the capacity in a higher percentage. When you take beds away, then more people trying to use lesser beds is going to increase the number of that looks like they're full to capacity, like they're 100%. But they've done it a little bit to themselves because they've reduced the beds. So yeah.
And that's it. We saw something similar in the UK as well, where, you know, millions of pounds was put into providing these Nightingale hospitals,
right?
And they weren't even used. They closed them down, and nothing was used. So it seems to follow the trend again in different countries to what we're seeing here as well. And, you know, even if people were sick, and I know people that have said they were sick, you know, where you are there, what was the recovery rate percentage for those people who were sick?
I believe it was 99.5% recovered. So
nearly 100%.
Nearly 100%. Yeah. Less than 1% didn't. Yeah, didn't. They died. Less than 1%. So 99, I believe it's 99.5% of the people that had it recovered.
Now, did you mention before that you'd requested records and proof that symptomatic, not asymptomatic, symptomatic positive cases of COVID-19 are actually contagious?
I did, and they didn't want to give me the information. They said I was denied that information. There are, I don't know, I'm going to touch on this. There are two theories. So we went to school and we learned the germ theory. So the germ theory is that I catch things from you, right? That's a big pharma germ theory. It's very convenient to think that we're all going to spread everything to everyone. I'm going to just put this out there and, you know, just for the heck of it, there is the terrain theory. And are you familiar with the terrain theory a little bit? Yeah. So there is the terrain theory that my body is made up of terrains. My lungs have terrains. My skin has terrains. You know, and the terrain theory is that when your body has had enough toxins, so you've eaten crap, you drank, you smoke, you do whatever, you're stressed, your body can only take so much. And the body's natural way of getting rid of that is actually through expelling mucus, fever, diarrhea, all the symptoms of COVID. So, you know, I do question what's really kind of happened here the symptomatic people. You have those symptoms, and is it your body just getting rid of what it needs to get rid of? And when you die, your body does not have enough energy and vitality to actually get rid of those toxins. Over time, you're 80, 90, your body's riddled, with whatever you've done all your life. It's on its way out, and you pass on. So they would not give me the information. Dr. Sam Bailey has a lovely video on that. Dr. Sam Bailey has a video on the germ theory versus the terrain theory. So it's just something to contemplate.
Yeah, it's very similar to when you look at nature in itself, the cycles that nature go through. Every year the most of the trees will have to shed the leaves and the regrowth of the fresh new stuff. And this seems to be very similar to the human body, where on a daily basis so many cells will die and so many cells will be reproduced. But as you say, it builds to a level of toxicity, and it seems to be seasonal yes. As the leaves dropping off the trees. It's a natural cycle that humans seem to go through, and it's happened every year since I was a child. I've seen it, if I've not been sick myself, a family member or a friend or whatever would be in the same position. Now, we've covered a lot today, and I really do hope that people will get the best out of this information, and certainly take the baton and run with it as far as I'm concerned, and discover the information that's on your site and be able to cite that information during intellectual conversations with friends rather than the usual mudslinging. Now, is there any further information today that you think we should bring to light for people watching that's going to be important for them?
There are a couple of things, Chris. I don't know how much more time you have, but I'll just want to cover a couple of.
You've got all the time you need. Don't worry.
I did a Freedom of Information request, and it's 2022-01349, and it came back to me December 21st, 2022, and I asked for what records that Dr. Robert Strang would have had that would have been reported to him from doctors, pharmacies, medical officers, hospital administrations, long-term care, nursing homes, etc., on the topic of COVID-19 vaccine adverse side events. And of all the Freedom of Information requests that I've done, this one was the most troubling to me. When I read the emails of medical officers trying to inform Dr. Robert Strang that adverse events, people have had reactions to the vaccine. So for example, the first vaccine in Nova Scotia was either December the 14th or the 16th of 2020. And within 2 weeks, they had 2 people that had anaphylactic shocks, very serious anaphylactic shocks, anaphylactic reactions. And so I see that email. And then the first person that died in long-term care was only about a month after that, January 28th. A woman died after a Moderna shot in long-term care. And so I see the email going to Dr. Robert Strang. Then there's media lines all throughout this same Freedom of Information request on how to handle media lines on some vaccine issues for you. So from the top, they were telling you how to handle these types of things that might arise during the vaccine rollout. Including, like, one of the media lines is, can vaccinated people spread the virus to others? So we were told, you have to get the vaccine to save Granny, because we could jeopardize and kill them. There is limited evidence on whether someone who received the vaccine is still able to spread the virus. So this is the information in the media line from the Public Health Agency of Canada. They don't know. They don't have the evidence. It can still, and this was dated January 21st, 2021. This is a month afterwards. Yeah, that's the one that died. I just want to give you an idea of some of the others. So this person received symptoms including swollen and tingling lips. They should consult Shelly McNeil before receiving the second shot. Why would you give somebody the second shot if they're having an allergic reaction to the first one? If you take a medication, Chris, for something and you have an allergic reaction, is your doctor going to say, no, Chris, you should take another pill or another dose of this? No.
No, it's funny. We interviewed Freddie Pye, and Freddie had some severe reactions and problems, and is still suffering to this day after his first vaccine. And he spoke to them about, he received a request to come in and have his second dose, and he contacted them and said, I'm having all these complications, all these problems, walking, talking, neurological issues, real serious issues. And it wasn't the case that this came on over a period of time afterwards. The moment they injected him, he said he had this metallic, strange taste in his mouth, and immediately the problem started and continued to get worse from that moment. They sent him out a second request to go and get his second vaccine, and when he told them what he'd gone through, they said, well, according to our records, everything should be all right. Shouldn't be a problem for you to get a second one. It blew me away that medical experts could be so nonchalant about the fact that somebody has had clear adverse effects from the moment that vaccine went into his body.
Yeah. I watched the videos that he had taken, or his child had taken, of him laying there unable to hold his legs still, unable to walk. And these people too are told, then there's the email where one of them took the second dose. Following the second dose, the individual immediately experienced headache, increasing itchiness, flush, experienced fullness in the throat and tongue. Like, yeah. And these people are running our health care system and instructing people to give that. Another one was on April 15th, 2021. Some unusual adverse events following immunizations have come in today. Stroke, right? Thrombotic events, thrombocythemia. I don't even know how to pronounce it alone. Like thrombosis, and so I wanted to cover that because he knew early on when he was telling us that these vaccines were safe and effective. Get your child, get everybody vaccinated. You cannot play sports. You can't go to a restaurant. You can't go to an outside farmer's market. You can't, skate on the oval. You can't do any, you can't sight in your gun at a gun range. That all of this had to be done because this is a dangerous virus. But he knew that people were suffering some very serious adverse events. I mean, you can't get much serious than somebody dying. No. And he that information wasn't forthcoming. So yes, I'd like to cover that one. That was one of the most troubling ones that I got. Let me just peek over my desk here. The other one that I would like to cover is that on the government COVID-19 website, they make a statement that unvaccinated Nova Scotians were hospitalized at nearly 4 times the rate and died more than 3 times the rate as those with 3 or more doses. So one would think or conclude from that the unvaccinated are trash because we're going around spreading some dying, hospitalized disease. What they failed to do, and it's a little bit of complicated response, but what they failed to do, the key words are with 3 or more doses. So all they did was compare the unvaccinated with those with 3 or more doses. They did not compare, and I've verified this with another FOI pop, they have not or don't have the record to provide me comparing the unvaccinated with those that are vaccinated, meaning those with 2 doses and 3 doses. So they're cherry picking the 3 doses in order to give us this narrative, which I feel is sort of the basis for not hiring back the nurses and the medical staff in Nova Scotia, because they are saying that the unvaccinated Nova Scotians were hospitalized at nearly four times the rate and died more than 3 times the rate as those with 3 or more doses. It's a cherry-picked phrase because they're not doing the calculations that are necessary. So I wanted to just point out, and I verified that with another FOI pop because it came back that they don't have the information comparing the unvaccinated to the vaccinated. We are a public opinion. So they've done polls. Communications Nova Scotia polled people to find out if there are any unvaccinated people left to vaccinate. So they ask a series of questions to our people, and they changed things when we started, and the people that were getting these polls started to say, the hell with you. No, I'm not getting vaccinated. Like there was none of us left that were going to budge on it, right? They couldn't squeeze us. So I believe that the polling orchestrated the lift of those orders in March 21st, 2022. It wasn't that the disease had suddenly disappeared or whatever disappeared. The polls told them something. And the other thing that I want to mention is can immunize. So people that were going to get vaccinated had to sign up, put their health number and their birth date, etc., into a booking process. And can immunize the Nova Scotia government had a contract with them. And when you look at their policy, like to secure their data, it's questionable. So I do have a lot of concern because a lot of it was redacted. So you can see where they've taken big chunks out of this. We paid quite a bit of money, taxpayers. They wouldn't give me the amount that people we paid for this system. And then I do question what's going to happen with that health information if we give them the health number and their policy isn't really clear cut and they've redacted some of that. I certainly would not want my personal health information anywhere near these guys because it's funded by Big Pharma. Bill Gates also funded the CEO of this company. So that also concerns me. Have I bored you yet? Do I have anything else?
No, we're good. We're good.
Oh, the other thing that I want to mention too are the schools. So the schools were to close, and the schools are going to be super spreaders, and you know the teachers and the school union stuff. So that was all like floating around as well. And wear your mask, and don't go home to granny because you got to wear a mask or you're going to kill them. Anyway, so I asked for total number of teachers who have tested positive with COVID-19, broken down to symptomatic, asymptomatic, how they were determined, what kind of tests they used. So I did that for the teachers, the students, the school, the staff, and the recovery rate and how many died of a whole system. And get this, we do not have the information you asked for. They were not tracking, which is not really a surprise, but to see it in writing sometimes, they were not tracking the total number of teachers, the students, the staff, none of it. What were they basing that all on?
Nothing. It was totally unjustified. Absolutely. When we look at everything we've looked at today, it was totally unjustified. And, this is where we land at. And this isn't the end of it. This isn't a collection of everything. This is, you must still have a lot of requests on the going now. And the information is going to continue to flow through and prove what we've been saying all along, that this has been a completely unjustified thing of which people have died, people have lost their jobs, people's mental health has suffered. People have got, really sick from the stress and the problems. Businesses have gone down. It's been, ridiculous. I'm well aware from information that came through to me from paramedics within your region there, that the suicide rate alone spiked massively during this time. And the sad part is a lot of the suicides were from younger children and teenagers.
It's shifted, actually. I saw a way pop on suicides, and it used to be in your 50s, like your 50 to 54-year-olds, and it has shifted down to your 19, your younger kids. And to close us down and to take away our social life and to do that to us, it is almost like, I almost feel like a part of me has gone through a post-traumatic stress, knowing the information that I knew and many of us knew, and then being silenced and not coming forward with context. And even like Dr. Lisa Barrett, another thing that I just wanted to mention, they have a therapeutics and prophylactics advisory group, and they wouldn't recommend ivermectin, like whether it works or whether it doesn't. She did a presentation to basically squash that, but there's conflicting information. I don't know, I'm not a doctor, but there was conflicting information that ivermectin may work, may not work. But if you were one of the people, the 114 died in 2 years, and if you did have COVID, why wouldn't you try at the end of life or whatever to treat them with ivermectin, which is basically a harmless drug that's been used around the world for very simple things. In some of those third world countries, they use it all the time for a whole gamut of things. So yeah, it's a head shaker.
It is, absolutely. Now, we mentioned it earlier, but where can people find all the evidence that you have amassed so far?
I created with the help of Paul Westhaver, a website. So it's my name. It's just www.shellyhipson. So SHELLY, no EY, just Shelly Hipson, HIPSON.ca. So what I've tried to do is just put the Koi Pops on there. I've got Canuck Law has covered a number of my freedom of information requests, so some articles on there, and a few videos, because this is massive, that I've tried to put some videos on there that capture a few of these Koi Pops there as well. So.
Well, many thanks, Shelly, for coming on to the Atlantic Underground podcast. And if you think what you've listened to here today is important, you too can play your part in spreading the good word by sharing this link. And we'll put the link down below as well to Shelly's website. But these videos, these podcasts that we put out, the more people we can get it into the hands of, the more people can support the cause of truth and moving forward and making progress. Liking what we do. And of course, as always, we do appreciate your feedback on this interview. There are comment sections within the several platforms that we will put this out on. So please, contact us, message me, let us know what you thought. And as we always say here, believe nothing and question everything. Thanks for watching. And thanks, Shelly, for joining us today. It's been mind-blowing, incredible, and the amount of information, I think even I'm going to have to go away and continue to digest what this really does mean. But that's been fantastic, and thanks so much for coming on and talking to us.
I am so over the moon just to have the opportunity to share the information, and thanks for your patience as I try to work through it, because it's been 2 years of a lot here. So thank you, and thank you to the listeners that have popped in and willing to be open to this. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you.
And we'll catch you all soon. Thank you.
Bye.